They weren't crazy. Medieval people really were being poisoned at dinner. They really were hunted in the woods for secret cults. Monks really did spy on them. Banker knights controlled money from the shadows. And underground networks really were smuggling people across borders at night. Tonight, we're going inside the conspiracy theories of the Middle Ages. And seeing which ones were paranoid nonsense, and which ones were terrifyingly real. We're not just talking about rumors. We're talking about fear that shaped laws, wars, and entire empires. So get comfortable. Because we're starting in the most dangerous place a medieval ruler could ever be. The dinner table. Chapter 1. The deadliest room in the castle. If you were a medieval king, the safest thing you could eat was nothing at all. Because the royal kitchen wasn't a cozy, friendly room. It was a war zone in disguise. Boiling meat that had gone bad 3 days ago. Fish that had been dead long enough to vote in an election. Bread baked so hard it could be used as a weapon. And behind every pot and pan, servants with knives, rivals with access, and the perfect excuse. Sorry, my lord. The meat must have spoiled. Poison in the Middle Ages was the original, low-budget regime change. Why march thousands of soldiers, risk your own neck, and bankrupt your treasury? When a single cup of wine could do the job? Rulers knew it. Nobles knew it. Servants knew it. So kings hired human shields. Not with armor and swords, but with taste buds. The royal taster. It sounded like a prestigious role. Important. Trusted. Close to power. In reality it meant, you eat this first. If you don't die, I will try a bite. Every bowl of stew. Every slice of meat. Every glass of wine. The taster took the first risk. If he survived long enough to burp, the king relaxed. If he collapsed, the king suddenly decided he was fasting for religious reasons. And people weren't imagining this threat. Chroniclers openly accused rulers of poisoning rivals. Take King John of England. He was petty, vindictive, and notoriously reckless. Writers from his own time accuse him of using poison to get rid of enemies. And down in the Byzantine Empire, rumor and reality were almost indistinguishable. Byzantine courts turned poisoning into a political art. Courtiers traded poisons like we trade gossip. Emperors died, suddenly, right after difficult meetings. Nobles drank cautiously, then panicked at the slightest stomach ache. It wasn't just secular courts. Even in the world of cardinals and popes, the kitchen was a battlefield. More than one churchman died suddenly at suspiciously convenient moments. Right before key elections. Right before deals. Right before their vote would have mattered. People said it was God's will. Which, in medieval language, sometimes meant, don't you dare ask what I just poured into that cup. So when you read that medieval kings were paranoid about food, understand this. They weren't being dramatic. They were trying not to die. Every royal meal was a conspiracy theory waiting for confirmation. Every spoonful was a cliffhanger. In the medieval world, courage mattered on the battlefield. But at the dinner table? Survival depended on who took the first bite. Chapter 2. Singing in the Woods. The Hidden Forest Cults. If the castle kitchen was dangerous, the forest was something else entirely. For medieval people, the dark woods were not just nature. They were the edge of reality. You stepped from the known world into the unknown. Bandits. Wolves. Spirits. Demons. And sometimes, singing. Villagers whispered about it. Groups of people gathering at night. Candles flickering between trees. Chanting. Dancing. Strange symbols carved into bark. Officially, Europe was Christian. Unofficially, The old gods had never fully left. The rumor was simple and juicy. There were secret pagan cults hiding in the forests, worshipping forbidden deities, performing strange rituals, maybe even working with demons. The church absolutely believed this. So did peasants. But what did these cults actually look like? Imagine not a Hollywood scene with perfectly robed sorcerers, but a handful of desperate villagers. They sneak away after sunset. They carry a bundle of herbs, a single candle, maybe a piece of bread. They find a clearing, a stone, an old tree that people have always considered special. And they do the only thing that gives them hope in a world where crops fail, children die, and the weather feels like a personal enemy. They pray. Not the prayers the priest uses. Older words. Older songs. Passed down in whispers. Medieval life was constant stress. You could starve in a good year. You could freeze in a mild winter. You could lose everything because of one storm. So if lighting a candle in the woods and begging the old powers to protect your fields felt right, you did it. From the church's perspective, though, this was not harmless. Anything outside official doctrine was a rival, a threat. So priests became forest detectives. They marched in with holy water and bravado, convinced they'd find witches, demons, or at least a few really guilty-looking rabbits. Most of the time, they just scared themselves. A breeze moved a branch. They heard an owl. They ran home and declared victory. But sometimes, they found something. Old stone rings still used as ritual sites. Bundles of burned herbs arranged in patterns. Symbols carved into rock, clearly older than the church itself. And occasionally, actual people. Startled, guilty peasants who didn't want to explain why they were out there. One of the strangest examples comes from northern Italy, the Benandanti. These people claimed they left their bodies at night, fought witches in the spirit world, and protected the community's crops. They weren't bragging about serving Satan. They thought they were the good guys. The church, expecting a grand demonic confession, instead got something that sounded more like a medieval superhero fan club. But instead of saying, "Okay, that's weird but harmless," they pushed it into the category of dangerous, suspicious, must be regulated. The result? The conspiracy about secret forest cults was absolutely true. Not in the way people imagined, no vast evil empire of sorcerers, but in a quieter, much more human way. Ordinary people, hiding in the trees, trying to save their crops, their children, and their sense of control, under a sky they didn't understand. Chapter 3, Monks, Spies, and the God-approved surveillance state. Now, let's go from the forest to the cloister. When you picture medieval monks, you might imagine peaceful men in robes, copying books by candlelight and baking bread. A few did that. Others were doing something closer to CIA work. Because if there was one institution that needed information on everyone, it was the medieval church. It was the biggest organization in Europe. It crossed borders. It owned land. It collected money. It judged what was true. To keep that system running, it needed eyes and ears in every village, town, and court. Enter the monk. They were literate. They were mobile. And they had the best cover story in history. "I'm just here to serve God." Monks traveled between monasteries, collecting letters, donations, rumors. They heard confessions. They listened to people's sins, fears, and secrets. Then they wrote everything down. Some of those writings became history books. Some became private reports. That's the difference between a chronicler and an annalist. The Dominicans, an order founded specifically to fight heresy, took this to a whole new level. They interviewed villagers about what they believed. They tracked who met with whom. They watched for suspicious friendships, books, and behavior. If someone started asking the wrong theological questions, a Dominican often showed up shortly afterward to help them understand. When the Inquisition developed, this all got formalized. Suddenly, there were archives full of testimonies, records, cross-reference reports, descriptions of who said what and when. Some were about genuine threats, armed rebellions, dangerous cults, violent sections. Others were petty, almost comical. Local report: woman seen gathering herbs at night. Probably witch. Shoemaker's wife, suspiciously joyful. Further observation required. From the outside, villagers started to feel like the church knew everything. Who cheated on their spouse? Who skipped mass? Who grumbled about taxes? Who muttered strange prayers at the edge of town? You couldn't see the network, but you could feel the results. And unlike many medieval systems, this one actually worked. Information flowed upward. Decisions flowed downward. And a billion whispered secrets flowed through that pipeline. Was there really a continent-wide, church-run network of informants and watchers? Yes. It just didn't call itself that. It called itself pastoral care. Chapter 4. The Bankers with Swords, the Knights Templar. Let's change scenery. From the silence of cloisters to the clang of armor. In the early 1100s, a small band of knights made a very simple promise. We will protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. They were poor. They had a humble base. They weren't that important. Then history happened. The Crusades escalated. Trade exploded. Pilgrimages became big business. And the Templars found themselves in a perfect position. Armed, disciplined, respected, and spread across Europe and the Middle East. They didn't just guard roads. They guarded money. Because if you're a pilgrim traveling from England to Jerusalem, you don't want to carry a bag full of coins the whole way. You'll either be robbed or accidentally murdered. So the Templars came up with a genius idea. You deposit your money with them in London. They give you a written note. You travel. When you arrive in Acre or Jerusalem, you present the note at a Templar house and get your funds back. It was the medieval version of a bank card. With swords. Templar houses became fortified treasuries. They stored gold. They managed estates. They lent money to kings. They built a multinational network of wealth and information. To ordinary people, this looked supernatural. To kings, it looked terrifying. Imagine being a monarch whose personal finances are weaker than the holy order living inside your borders. Imagine being deeply in debt, to men who answer to no king, only to God. Rumors exploded. The Templars have a massive hidden treasure. The Templars guard secret relics. The Templars worship a mysterious head. The Templars know things the Church doesn't want us to know. And the fun part? Buried inside that paranoia was truth. They did have treasure. They did have a complex, coded financial system. They did keep secrets, not demonic rituals, but banking procedures, political letters, and military plans. And then came King Philip IV of France. He was broke. He was politically cornered. And he owed a lot of money to the Templars. So he turned conspiracy theory into government policy. He accused the entire order of heresy, of spitting on the cross, of worshipping evil, of obscene, secret rituals. He had them arrested in a coordinated strike. He tortured them until confessions spilled out, confessions that told him exactly what he wanted to hear. It's tempting to dismiss all of this as propaganda. And it mostly was. But it worked because people already believed the Templars were hiding powerful secrets. And in a way, they were. Not supernatural secrets. Financial secrets. They had built a banking empire that could move money faster than rumor. They had developed procedures for storing, tracking, and safeguarding wealth that nobody else truly understood. So yes, the Templars were victims of lies. But they were also guilty of something unforgivable in the eyes of medieval kings. Being too rich, too connected, and too independent. Their downfall wasn't the work of demons. It was the oldest power in the world. Dead. Chapter 5. The Plague, the Church, and the Information Gap. Now shift forward to one of the darkest moments in European history. The Black Death. Between the late 1340s and the early 1350s, the plague smashed across the continent. Entire villages vanished. Cities lost half their population. Corpses piled faster than anyone could bury them. Medieval people tried to explain it. Some blamed bad air. Some blamed demons. Some blamed the stars. Some blamed their neighbors' goats. But a particularly dark rumor spread. The church knows more than it's telling us. The logic went like this. If you're a peasant in a field, you see your village. If you're a merchant on the road, you see a few towns. But if you're a bishop, a cardinal, or a pope, you see letters from everywhere. Ships reporting sickness in port cities. Monasteries reporting entire communities falling ill. Merchants warning about certain roads. Officials begging for guidance. The higher you were in the hierarchy, the more you knew about how widespread the plague was. There are records of bishops warning each other about disease before it arrived locally, closing city gates early, moving to countryside estates for health reasons, ordering quarantines before anyone in the town was visibly sick. Meanwhile, what did ordinary people get? Generic advice. Pray harder. Repent. Burn herbs. Don't laugh too much. Yes, joy was considered risky in some texts. The information gap was massive. Church officials didn't understand the science of disease. But they did see patterns. They knew which ports were infected. They knew which routes were dangerous. They knew monasteries were dying in droves. And like almost every power structure in history, they prioritized themselves first. Not as part of some diabolical genocide plan, but out of a mixture of self-preservation, confusion, and fear of public panic. So, were medieval conspiracy theorists right when they said, "The Church knows more about the plague than it admits"? Yes. The Church did know more. Not how to cure it. Not how to stop it. But where it was going, and how bad it really was. They held back some of that information. And regular people paid the price. Chapter 6. Cloistered Assassins. When monks carried knives. Let's go back into the monastery one more time. This time, not for spies. For killers. It sounds like the plot of a Netflix drama. Assassin monks, the cloistered killers of medieval Europe. But hidden behind the jokes are clues that this wasn't entirely fantasy. Monasteries weren't just spiritual centers. They were safe spaces. If you put on a robe and claimed to serve God, you suddenly had shelter, food, legal protection, freedom to travel. You also had the ability to move through borders without everyone demanding to search your bags. Now imagine you're a noble with a problem. You need someone removed. Quietly. No public trial. No obvious motive. Do you send a knight? No. Knights are loud. They brag. They leave tracks. Instead, you find a different kind of man. A brother who's not particularly focused on prayer. Strong, obedient, comfortable with long journeys and uncomfortable conversations. Chroniclers rarely say, "This monk was an assassin," but they do record monks caught carrying weapons they weren't supposed to have. Brothers leaving the monastery at odd hours. Nobles dying mysteriously after recent visits from religious envoys. Quiet references to brothers who failed to follow discipline, which is often code for behavior too scandalous to spell out. In a world where monasteries doubled as intelligence centers, it doesn't take a huge leap to imagine some of that intelligence work turn more physical. If nobles were already using poison, mercenaries, and sabotage, why wouldn't they use men with the perfect disguise? A simple robe, a hood, a solemn expression, and a knife under the sleeve. It's one of those conspiracies that historians can't fully prove. But the circumstantial evidence stacks up. Traveling monks plus political violence plus missing rivals plus vague accusations equals a very uncomfortable picture. Medieval villagers whispered that some monks were more dangerous than they looked. For once, the whisper might have been close to the truth. Chapter 7. The First Witch Hunts. Before they were fashionable. When people hear witch hunts, they usually think of the 1500s and 1600s. Bonfires, mass trials, kingdoms losing their minds. But unofficial witch hunts started early. Quietly. Locally. Long before big church manuals defined what a witch was. Villages were already targeting someone. The woman who knew too much. She knew herbs. She knew childbirth. She knew how to ease pain when, proper, doctors just made things worse. She also knew which plants killed rats, which plants stopped pregnancies, which plants, used wrong, could kill a human. In a world with almost no formal medicine, this knowledge was priceless and terrifying. These women formed loose, invisible networks. Older healers training younger ones. Neighbors sharing recipes. Traders carrying seeds and remedies from town to town. From the outside, this looked like a hidden sisterhood. From the inside, it was survival. But when something went wrong, a cow died, a baby was stillborn, a storm ruined the harvest. Fear needed a face. And the healer, the woman everyone visited in secret, became the perfect target. Local courts started trying people on vague charges of sorcery. Before any big, centralized witch hunting machine existed. Interrogations happened in barns. Accusations came from jealous neighbors. Punishments ranged from exile to death. No international conspiracy. Just dozens of tiny, tragic ones. But if you strip away the hysteria, you find something real underneath. There were hidden networks. There were secret meetings. There was forbidden knowledge. It just wasn't demonic. It was experimental medicine. To a frightened, religiously anxious society. That distinction didn't matter. Magic was what you couldn't explain. And competence was hard to explain. Chapter 8. Royal Fakes. When dead kings weren't really dead. Medieval Europe loved identity drama. In a world without photos, fingerprints, or ID cards, your identity was whatever enough people agreed it was. If a stranger walked into town and said, "I'm the lost prince," what could you really check? Maybe he spoke like a noble. Maybe he knew court etiquette. Maybe he had inside jokes about old events. That was often enough to start a small civil war. Now add one more ingredient. Rulers who died. Suddenly. In war, by illness, or in suspicious accidents. Sometimes there was a body. Sometimes there wasn't. Sometimes there was a funeral. Sometimes there was just a rumor that left a giant opening for conspiracy. What if he isn't dead? What if he escaped? What if he's in hiding, waiting to come back? People told these stories because they wanted them to be true. A good king, taken too soon, might one day return and fix everything. A bad king might still be out there, secretly pulling strings. One of the most famous legends centers on Frederick II, Holy Roman Emperor in the 13th century. He was brilliant, eccentric, interested in science, art, and falconry. He was so different from the stereotype of a medieval ruler that many churchmen thought he was suspicious. When he died, people didn't want to believe it. Rumors spread that he was just taking a long rest, that he had vanished to the east, that he would come back at the end of days and restore the empire. Whole cults formed around the idea that Frederick was alive. Years later, men appeared claiming to be Frederick, or Frederick's secret heir. Sometimes they knew enough details to convince people. Sometimes they were obvious frauds. But underneath the fake claimants was a real pattern. Medieval rulers did occasionally fake disappearances. They did vanish for long stretches. They did switch identities for safety. In chaos and civil war, being dead, on paper, could be useful. So when medieval people said, "The king didn't really die," they were often wrong in that specific case, but rooted in a larger truth. Identities were flexible. Records were terrible. And power was slippery. Royal imposters weren't just fairy tale characters. They were career options. Chapter 9, Poisoned Wells, Weaponizing Water. Few things terrified medieval people more than contaminated water. They didn't know about bacteria. They didn't know about germs. But they knew this. Sometimes you drank from a well, and then your whole family died. The conspiracy that followed was simple and brutal. Someone poisoned the well. Sometimes someone meant a specific target. A stranger, a disliked neighbor, or a minority community people already hated. Sometimes it was vaguer. Witches did it. Demons did it. The tragedy is that in many cases, nobody had done anything on purpose. Wells were shallow. Sewage leaked. Dead animals fell in. Rain washed filth straight down the shaft. The water was a bacterial soup. But because people couldn't see what was happening, they invented culprits. However, there were moments when the conspiracy was not just plausible, but true. During sieges, armies absolutely did contaminate enemy wells. They dumped dead animals into them. They threw garbage, corpses, and rotting materials inside. They cut off the water supply as a weapon. Siege handbooks literally recommended it. Poison the enemy's water, and you don't have to fight as long. Later, during the Black Death, the old fear of poisoned wells combined with panic about the plague. Jewish communities, already marginalized and blamed for everything from bad weather to crop failure, were accused en masse of poisoning Christian wells. These accusations were false, but they led to massacres. The idea that outsiders are poisoning our water became one of the deadliest conspiracy stories in European history. So, were wells really poisoned? Sometimes, yes. By bacteria. By contamination. By armies in war. And once people got used to the idea that water could be weaponized, they saw plots everywhere. When your world is unstable, simple answers become irresistible. And in the Middle Ages, the simplest answer often was, "It must be the well." Chapter 10, Forbidden Books, the Church's Secret Libraries. Let's return one last time to the Church. Not to talk about spying or disease this time, But books. Medieval Europe loved to present itself as believing one simple thing. The Bible is true. The Church is right. Everything else is dangerous. But under the floorboards of that certainty was a quiet, awkward reality. A lot of dangerous books were really useful. Scientific works from the Islamic world, philosophical texts from ancient Greece, medical treatises that actually helped people, astrological, mathematical, and geographic works. The Church had a problem. Some of these contradicted official doctrine. Some suggested the universe worked differently than Scripture seemed to say. Some raised questions that were inconvenient. So what do? You don't burn everything. You lock it up. Many monasteries and cathedral schools had special vaults or rooms for problematic texts. They might be labeled as rare, advanced, restricted. Sometimes only a few trusted scholars or senior clergy were allowed to read them. These rooms were not Hollywood vaults with laser systems. They were small, dusty spaces with locked wooden doors and a suspicious librarian. But they existed. And their contents were explosive. Alternative versions of Gospels. Philosophers who said the earth moved. Doctors who argued that the body worked in ways that didn't fit neat religious metaphors. Pagan authors who got real things right. From eclipses to geography. Church leaders argued constantly about this. Should knowledge be preserved for the wise, or hidden forever so it wouldn't disturb the faithful? Many compromised. Keep the books. Don't destroy them. But don't let just anyone see them. From the outside, people noticed weird things. They noticed that certain scribes copied texts that later disappeared. They noticed that a few educated men occasionally hinted that they had read things they weren't allowed to fully discuss. They saw locked rooms, restricted shelves, books chained to desks. So when rumors spread that the Church had secret libraries of forbidden knowledge, they weren't wrong. The libraries were there. And inside them were ideas that, if taken seriously, could have shaken the foundation of medieval thought. The safest solution? Hide them. Study them quietly. Pretend publicly that they didn't exist. Because in the Middle Ages, knowledge itself could be a conspiracy. Chapter 11: Italy's Invisible Wars, Spies, Dropbox, and Whisper Networks. If there was one place in medieval Europe where conspiracy stopped being theory and became a lifestyle, it was Italy. Venice, Florence, Milan, Genoa, Siena. Today they're tourist magnets. Back then, they were armed rival siblings, locked in an endless family feud. These city-states competed over everything: trade, banking, alliances, architecture. Who had the most dramatic political scandals? On paper, they signed treaties. They went to church. They held councils. Behind the scenes, they fought silent wars. Venice, especially, built a legendary intelligence system. They created secret councils, focused on watching neighbors, tracking money, and intercepting suspicious correspondence. They had Dropbox carved into walls, mouths of stone lions where citizens could slip anonymous accusations inside. Someone is cheating the state. My neighbor is taking bribes. This official is working for Florence. These notes were collected, sorted, investigated. Sometimes they led to arrests. Sometimes they led to quiet threats. Sometimes they were used to keep people obedient. Florence had its own networks, especially under families like the Medici. Bankers, diplomats, and merchants passed intelligence. between branches of the same family scattered across Europe. If a pope needed money, if a king seemed weak, if a city was ripe for influence, they knew. Milan leaned into intimidation and brute force. Genoa worked the sea, sabotaging ships and trade. Everywhere you looked, there were bribes, secret letters, double agents, and accidents that happened to politically inconvenient people. To the average citizen, this felt like rumor. But to the elites, it was the operating system. The conspiracy theorists in the taverns were right. There really was a hidden war running beneath the visible wars. A war fought with ink, coin, and whispers. And in many cases, that quiet war decided more than any battlefield. Chapter 12: Underground Lifelines, Jewish and Muslim Secret Networks. One last conspiracy takes us back to marginalized communities. Medieval Christians often imagined that Jews and Muslims in Europe were linked in vast secret webs. Secret codes, secret meetings, secret plans to overthrow Christendom. They were half right. There were networks. There were codes. There were secret routes. But they weren't designed to overturn Europe. They were designed to survive Europe. In an age where Jewish communities could be expelled from a kingdom with a single royal decree, they needed backup plans, safe houses, trusted families, merchants who could quietly move letters or people if things turned bad, if a city turned violent, if rumors of a massacre began, if new taxes or restrictions were announced. These networks sprang into action. A lamp in a window, a phrase in a letter, a sign on a door. All signals. It's time to move. Don't come here. Wait in this town instead. Muslim communities in Iberia and North Africa developed similar routes. Scholars, traders, and fugitives traveled along prearranged paths that avoided hostile checkpoints and relied on sympathetic households. From the outside, powerful Christian rulers saw only one thing. These people can move, communicate, and recover faster than we expect. That looked like a threat to the people living inside those networks. It was their only defense. When conquerors changed, when laws flipped overnight, when churches turned hostile, those hidden lines of trust made the difference between life and death. So yes, there was a secret network running under the surface of Europe. But it wasn't trying to conquer the continent. It was trying not to be erased from it. Chapter 13: The Shadow Economy. How everyone was cheating the system. Let's pull all of this together. In the place where ordinary people lived. Not in castles. Not in monasteries. But in crowded streets, markets, and slums. Officially, medieval Europe ran on a clean system. Kings granted land to nobles. Nobles protected peasants. Peasants paid taxes in grain and labor. The church took its tithe. Everyone knew their place. Unofficially, nothing worked that neatly. Laws set one price. The market set another. The church banned interest on loans. Everyone charged it in secret anyway. Out of this gap grew a shadow economy that touched every level of society. Peasants paid part of their rent in cash, earned from selling extra goods on the side. Merchants smuggled untaxed cargo through side ports and back roads. Tavern owners watered their wine and reported half their earnings. Thieves organized themselves. Because disorganization was bad for business, they had codes, boundaries, retaliation rules. Moneylenders, often from communities officially banned from certain trades, Stepped in where official credit didn't exist. Need funds to start a workshop? You didn't go to the king. You went to the guy in the corner of the tavern, who helped people out for a price. Everyone officially condemned this. Everyone unofficially relied on it. The whole thing ran on a simple, unspoken agreement. We will pretend the official system is what matters, while quietly running a second system underneath that actually keeps us alive. So when people whispered that the real power in town isn't the Lord, it's the merchants, the lenders, the thieves, they weren't exaggerating. They were describing the engine room of medieval life. The biggest conspiracy of the Middle Ages was not a secret cult or a demonic plot. It was the basic fact that everyone quietly knew the laws on paper were not the laws of survival. Ending what medieval conspiracies really tell us. So what do all these stories have in common? Poisoned meals, forest rituals, spying monks, banker knights, healers on trial, fake kings, poisoned wells, secret books, Italian spy states, underground refugee routes, shadow economies. They all start the same way. Something bad happens. People don't fully understand why, and they go looking for a reason. Sometimes they invent dragons where there are only shadows. But sometimes, painfully often, they stumble onto something real. Yes, people really were poisoned. Yes, forbidden rituals did happen. Yes, the church spied. Yes, the Templars controlled money in secretive ways. Yes, healers had underground networks. Yes, minorities built hidden escape routes. Yes, the official economy was only half the story. The lesson isn't believe every wild rumor. It's that behind some conspiracy theories, there's usually a smaller, quieter, very human truth. People in power protect themselves. People in danger protect each other. And everyone, on every level, is more afraid than they want to admit. The Middle Ages weren't a time of simple faith and blind obedience. They were a time of constant suspicion. At the dinner table, in the woods, in monasteries, in banks, in slums. And if that sounds familiar, it's because our world hasn't changed as much as we'd like to think. If you enjoy peeling back the weird, hidden side of history like this, the rumors that turned out to be real, hit subscribe. I've got plenty more stories about spies in robes, lost cities, fake messiahs, and forgotten revolts that textbooks politely skip. And if you want to keep going right now, click on the next video. In it, we dive into how one young king, Alexander the Great, didn't just win with courage and genius. He won with the most advanced logistical machine the ancient world had ever seen. It sounds boring, but it's the secret reason his empire existed at all. Trust me, that one will change how you think about every ancient war you've ever heard of. So subscribe, watch the next video, and let's keep pulling on these threads the past has been trying to hide.